Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hi everyone. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know what I'm working on right now. I'm getting ready to start a new term of live stream classes, and there will be 2 different 6-week series that will pretty much take us up to the holidays, so it'll be my last set of the year. One is a series of stretch and strengthen classes that's focused on the upper body, like neck, shoulders, upper back, and everything connected to them. Plus, it will incorporate heart meditations on loving kindness, compassion, gratitude, and equanimity. The Stretch and Strengthen series is my gentle to moderate, therapeutic, but active yoga class. And the other series is a Yin Yoga plus self-massage series, where we'll be using some therapy ball massage and self-applied acupressure along the energy meridians to complement yin yoga poses and really get our chi flowing. So you can check out these class offerings at movedtomeditate.yoga/livestream-classes, or just go on my website and look for the live stream in the menu and get all the details there. There are 2 ways to sign up. You can just register for the series itself, the 6 classes plus the Zoom recording, or you can join my class library at the Library Plus live stream tier and get access to both the live stream series, the Yin and the Stretch and Strengthen, and all of my pre-recorded classes. And this is a new offering. I'm pretty excited about it because I think it's a really good deal, and I hope that it will help support you to practice more often and just enjoy your practice. All right, so the details are all at movedtomeditate.yoga/livestream-classes. And now on to this week's episode. Okay, hello. Today on the podcast, we are talking to Jessica Grosman. And I want to tell you just a little bit about Jessica's background from her bio and then let her introduce herself as well. Jessica's mission is to help people get comfortable and connected with their own body through food and yoga. And I love food, so this is a good conversation to be having. She is an Anti-Diet Registered Dietitian, a certified intuitive eating counselor, a body-inclusive health practitioner, and a yoga teacher. And her business is called With Health and Gratitude. So she really has a lot of expertise on this topic of food. And the focus of her yoga teaching is actually yin yoga, which we have in common. This really delightful, warm and fuzzy and soft and slow practice of yin yoga. And she noted in her bio that yoga is often a healing modality in the recovery from eating disorders. So she's involved with classes that allow her to bring her calming presence and her thoughtful language to guiding yin practices in particular as a complement to multidisciplinary work with ED clients. And that's part of what she does. She also teaches yin yoga for anyone. So thank you, Jessica, for being here today and for having this conversation. We'll see where it takes us, but let's start with you just telling us a little bit about what you want us to know about your background and your studies and what you do.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Addie, for having me on your podcast. And I love any opportunity to talk with other fellow yin yoga practitioners, our small but growing niche of the yoga world. So thank you for having me. So I am, as you mentioned, both a registered dietitian and a yoga teacher. And the bulk of my work is working as a yoga teacher. I have been a registered dietitian now for 20 years, and I've been practicing yoga for over 20 years. Yeah, it's my true love of practicing and teaching yoga that is my day-to-day work, and I allow my background in education and continuing education as a registered dietitian to inform the yoga work and continual study that I do.
That's so cool. I think you have a perspective on that most of us yoga teachers don't have. Tell me a little bit about the training to be a dietitian. Like, I have no idea what that looks like. I'm curious.
The training to become a registered dietitian is long. So I have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's of science in nutritional science. And from there, I did a combined dietetic internship and master's of science in nutritional science as well. So a dietetic internship is similar to a medical residency, what med students go through, just thankfully not as long. But it is a clinical experience working in a hospital, shadowing staff dietitians, and then going on and being, dietitian in the hospital in the clinical environment. And in a clinical environment, dietitians do more than just talk to patients about meal plans and food, but it goes as far as writing orders for tube feedings and parenteral nutrition and advising caloric needs for burn victims
Oh,
and
wow.
stuff that isn't thankfully as common in the non-clinical environment, non-hospital environment. Those are really medically complex
Mm.
situations. In the hospital, it's a lot of meal planning and working with patients who have undergone significant medical stress for whatever condition they're undergoing.
Mhm. And supporting people who are in that, like, medical healing process.
Yes and no. The sad thing is, and even 20 years ago when I was in my schooling, is that, or when I finished schooling, is that hospital stays are short. Hospital stays
Mm.
are brief. And when somebody is in the hospital sick, the last thing they want to hear is what sort of food they will or won't be able to continue eating due to their medical condition. So, like you, I love food. I love cooking. I love eating. I love everything surrounding food. I love grocery shopping. I have to tell you, I love grocery shopping. And early in the pandemic, when we were kind of limited on that stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, I honestly feel like food shopping is one of my favorite livelihoods. So, but back to like when you're in a clinical environment, that the last thing that you want to tell, for me, the last thing that I wanted to tell somebody is, I'm sorry, but this favorite food of yours is no longer supportive of your medical condition. So when I finished school, when I finished my master's degree, when I finished my dietetic internship, I made a informed decision that I was not going to continue on that path and work as a clinical dietitian. It just was not for me. And so that's where I took my practice as a registered dietitian.
That makes sense that, you wanted to work with people where you could be more in the celebration of food and enjoyment. And it fits in with your yoga teaching, that it's really about a way of connecting with yourself and your joy and what supports your body and your health. So that makes sense to me that you went in that direction. Although, thank goodness there are people who can work in that clinical environment, and I'm sure that they're really, really needed. I wanted to ask you about the term anti-diet dietitian and the phrase healthy at every size. I've heard these. I'm not sure if all of our podcast listeners would be familiar though. So if you could break down, healthy at every size and what is an anti-diet dietitian?
So, an anti-diet dietitian, I think we see a lot of this terminology now coming up. I have to say, the term anti diet dietitian really is counterintuitive to my education, to 20 years ago of learning that health health was indicative of weight, and putting clients, putting patients on diets for weight loss was going to be the way to promote and achieve health. So, stepping away and far away, I won't even say stepping away, running away from that distinction is that of the anti diet dietitian, such as myself, who believes that all foods fit into somebody's lifestyle, somebody's meal plan, somebody's way of living, that it is not the specific food that is what brings health to the body, but it is eating in general and eating in abundance and eating the wide variety of food that thankfully we are able to have on earth. That is what brings about the joy and happiness and overall health to somebody's body.
I bet that's a radical notion for some to hear that, working with a dietitian could be about something other than restriction and weight loss and the list of bad foods that we can't eat.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, I find it really interesting that my yoga teaching is centered around yin yoga because there's that dichotomy of yin and yang, which
Mm.
I fully embrace. And I'm sure we can talk about that later on, but bringing it into the food realm. So I embrace yin and yang as that dichotomy, but I absolutely want to have nothing to do with the dichotomy of good and bad. I don't label foods as good or bad. There is room for everything on the plate. So it's kind of, a flip from between the yoga practice and the dietetics practice that I have.
Yeah, I think that's like a major unlearning for a lot of us because we've just had so much conditioning around things, that are healthy or unhealthy. And sometimes the advice gets so confusing and it changes all the time. Like
Mhm.
my husband's always kind of got this shorthand for that where he's like, are eggs bad for us? Or are they good for us right now? We don't know.
Eggs are
Because
eggs.
eggs are eggs,
I'm going to
right?
go and
But
tell them that eggs are eggs.
yeah, and it's just so funny because like these trends come around where it's like, oh, fat is bad. Oh, you're going to get high cholesterol if you eat eggs or all
Mm,
this stuff, and it seems like that is so reductionist and so oversimplifying of something that's hard to understand, which is how our body responds to food. So I
right.
love that you are bringing this into this like world of embodied listening and mindfulness and of actually just checking out, when I eat this, how do I feel and how does this affect me, and on
Mm,
all the different layers of
mhm,
like physically and emotionally. And
mm.
yeah.
There's so much unlearning to do, as you mentioned, and my role and training as a certified intuitive eating counselor really dove into that because in that paradigm, we're looking at returning or helping clients return to their young selves when we all are born as intuitive eaters, as being able to understand from the inside out when we are hungry and when we are full, and having cues and actual um, feelings of satiety and of hunger, which are conditioned over time by our very sad diet culture and now wellness culture, co opted by wellness culture, to tell us that we should be full if we eat this, we should be hungry if we haven't eaten in this many hours. And so it's a lot of, I think for so many people, a lot of unlearning and returning to that younger self, if possible.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's actually really just sweet to me. I'm curious about how you said you've been practicing yoga all along and how yoga fit into your world as a dietitian and when it was that you actually took a training and decided to start teaching and offering yoga.
Mhm. So my early exposure to yoga was very different from what it is right now. I used yoga 20 years ago as a day off from my cardio workout routine, like using it as like the day off from running that isn't really a day off. It's just
Mhm.
an easier quote unquote workout. And that's, I think, for a lot of people 20 plus years ago, that's what yoga was. And it still is for a lot of people, that very yang based, power driven, asana driven practice isn't really even a practice. It's a workout. It's what people consider as their, workout in place of running, in place of strength training or whatever it may be. And that I fell into that camp. I definitely did. I visited lots of different yoga classes over the years and lots of different styles of yoga. I was a distance runner. And when I became injured, I turned to yoga once again to remain active without running distance. And unfortunately, injured myself even more in that yoga practice than
Oh
from my running.
no.
I was practicing Bikram yoga, which was not really the antidote to a running injury.
Mm.
So at
Mhm.
that time, I really didn't trust my body and trust that yoga was the answer um, that I was looking for. And it took a while. And it took more, I would say, trial and error of different styles of yoga in my local studio before I found that yin yoga practice was really the answer that I needed and what my body really needed to harmonize all that was going on internally in my body. So it took a while. And I fell in love with yin, though I really did, and it wasn't for till several years ago, several years after finding yin, that I took my 200-hour yoga teacher training, and ironically, the lead trainer was anti-yin.
Oh. Might not be the best fit for you.
Wasn't the best fit for me. But I persevered because I knew that if I could get through that training, that there were so many other possibilities and deeper dives that I could take on the other side.
Mhm.
And thankfully, that 200-hour training I was able to do as an intensive in a 4-week intensive summer
Mhm.
training. And so I just kind of like bit my lip and forged ahead for 4 weeks. It was I wouldn't recommend doing a 4-week, 200-hour training, but I did it, and, it's led to just so many greater options on the other side for me in terms of training, and now
Mhm.
I'm in the process of finishing my 300-hour training.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and it sounds like, despite meeting skeptics, you knew from experience that you really needed this yin side of things. Like initially you'd been really drawn to the yang side of practice and like the heated, more intense, strenuous yoga. Because that's like what's familiar to a lot of us, but that something hooked you over time and you kept going, so you found other avenues, and you knew from your own experience that this yin side was had something for you that was really valuable. So I'm glad you persisted with that, even though you had trainers who didn't get it. And that's okay. Like, we all like what we like, but I'm glad you kept going. So, yeah, kind of tying it back though to your experience as a dietitian and, being a yogi, can you talk about how do you see what I see, that sometimes there's a way that mainstream kind of diet culture, we've sort of hinted at, how fitness culture affects the way people think of yoga, but also diet culture, and that they're really intertwined. And like, how does this like diet, this like beauty, fashion industry, how does this affect the way people think of yoga or what yoga is or how the media portrays it?
Mhm. This is a great question, and I want to tie in because I realized that I never answered what health at every size is, so I'm gonna somehow get it all together, and if I lose my train of thought, then you'll have to bring me
I'll bring
back,
it back.
but, um, so, I think that social media, I'm gonna bring in social media here, has done great things for yoga and has also been a nightmare for yoga. That's a really bold statement, but social media has definitely promoted yoga, promoted what is supposedly yoga to millions and millions of people that otherwise wouldn't practice. And whether that be through lifestyle brands, clothing brands, destination yoga retreats, celebrities practicing yoga or saying that they practice yoga, so on and so forth. Yoga has definitely come to the masses as a result of social media. And we also know that social media brings diet culture to the masses through influencers, through self proclaimed gurus and health
Mhm.
wannabes. I don't
The
know.
quick
I don't
fix
even
of the week, the
exactly.
the special
Exactly.
green juice of the week.
Special whatever of the week. So I think that yoga has become really popular as a result without a real definition of what yoga is.
Mhm.
We and I say we just like the collective people out in the world, not you and I, but we see yoga as, usually it's a normal sized bodied white woman wearing form fitting clothes, doing acrobatic shapes, potentially on a beach. You and I know that that's not yoga. That can be yoga, but that's not my yoga. And Addie, I don't think that's your yoga either.
It doesn't usually look that glamorous, I have to tell you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I define yoga as the integration of body, mind, breath in the present moment. So right now, you and I are practicing yoga. I'm here in my body, my mind, and I am breathing and in the present moment. And here we are. And that is not the yoga that is portrayed in photos, in magazines, in conversation for most people. And so while I'm glad that a lot more people have been drawn to yoga, I am saddened that the true essence of yoga and yogic practices beyond asana are not as well known or even shared amongst the masses.
And that's why we're here.
Mhm.
Because it is really unfortunate to see the ways that the that media can actually use yoga to reinforce these unrealistic standards that people compare themselves to, whether it be the affluence of going to the special place, the tropical isle to practice, or the body image, or even just the feeling of looking calm all the time.
Yeah,
Because we're not. And like, we promote this like highlight reel version of things, and it's not necessarily healthy or even an accurate representation of what
correct.
yoga is.
Correct. And I told you I was going to loop into what health at every size is.
Yes,
And
please.
health at every size is a term coined by Lindo Bacon that it's a paradigm. It's a way of working with people and relating to people that health, whatever and however you define health, is not related to the size of a body. And therefore, weight and size is not a marker of health. So, health at every size, it's a wonderful paradigm in the yoga community for that yoga is accessible to all bodies, all shapes, all sizes. There are ways to adapt to make yoga more accessible to all bodies beyond what we see in social media. But knowing that the definition that I use of yoga, the integration of body, mind, and breath in the present moment, can be used to any body, whether it is an able bodied or a body with physical challenges. And I don't like saying physical challenge, but somebody who is not able bodied is right along the lines of health at every size and weight inclusive health practices.
I think that's so yogic because it brings us back to the present moment and connecting with ourselves exactly as we are,
Mhm.
being accepting of ourselves in the present rather than holding some kind of future image of like, oh, this is what it'll be like when I'm this
Mhm.
way, different than how I am right now. And it also pulls us away from that whole comparing mind experience that,
Mhm.
we know is causes us a lot of stress, and it's present everywhere around us, but we see it also in our yoga practice, and we can use our yoga practice to train ourselves away from that sense of comparing and to just be with ourselves in the present moment and to recognize that health is possible, happiness is possible, this kind of freedom is possible in the present moment,
Right.
exactly as it is, exactly
Mhm.
as we are.
Yes, all bodies are deserving of the same respect, the same privileges that health brings to them. And it's just a matter of realizing that it's not body shape, not body ability that defines our health. There's
Yeah,
so
well
much,
said.
so much.
Well said. um, sometimes we run into issues in yoga where, yoga teachers, it's unless you are a trained dietitian like you are, it's not in the scope of our practice as yoga teachers to give dietary advice or comment on things like that. And yet, we'll sometimes be in a class and hear the teacher start saying things about food or nutrition or what we should or shouldn't be eating or things like that. And I just wonder, if you can comment on why that's problematic.
It's problematic because, as you said, it's out of the scope of practice of a yoga teacher. You know, nutrition is not addressed in a yoga teacher training, nor should it be. Just as teaching yoga is out of the scope of practice of a registered dietitian. Registered dietitians, yes, can come in and talk with a calm and soothing voice with their clients and present mindfulness practices, but that is not yoga. So, you know, for a yoga teacher to comment on food and nutrition and eating practices is first and foremost harmful for the students who oftentimes hang on every word that the teacher says and holds the teacher in such a high regard. And, you know, I'm not saying to not be respectful of your yoga teacher, but I also am a firm believer that as a teacher, I learn so much from my students. And so there is that reciprocity. And with that comes the realization that as a teacher, I'm responsible for my students' well-being just as the students are responsible for my well-being. It's that energetic exchange of a teacher and a student. So I know I've gotten a little off topic there, but because I was just,
I don't think so. I think it's you're talking about this like mutual respect in the student teacher relationship. And this is why like we have to be so careful about our words because when we're practicing yoga together, people are in this like vulnerable state. They're opening up their bodies and their hearts and like what we say can stick in ways that we don't realize. So
Mhm.
it's important to stay, firm in like what is our expertise to offer.
It is. It's so important, and I've seen firsthand. I've been a student of plenty of teachers who have shared their deep held dietary nutrition beliefs with their class. And thankfully for me, I'm able to just kind of smile and let it just pass right by me. Whereas I know that fellow students are just soaking it in. And, at the time, some would say, like, oh, why didn't you say anything? And I don't want to cause trouble. Yet, looking back, I probably should have said something like, "This is not your place to say this." And, deep and on my long to-do list goals as this, um, registered dietitian and yoga teacher, and there are plenty of people that hold both of those credentials, but, so I don't wanna make it out that I'm the only person that's both a registered dietitian and a yoga teacher, but on my long list of things to do that marries those 2 professions together is to write nutrition curriculum for yoga teachers, not for the point of yoga teachers teaching nutrition, but more as a self-care, self-improvement module to their teaching for themselves, and
Hmm.
to learn proper nutrition from a trained professional, and what it is, how they can use it for themselves and not to perpetuate harm to their students.
That
So it's
sounds
way
great.
down on my to-do list.
You'll get to it. I have a feeling. That sounds good just to even have this be part of a training where, we would just reflect on how this fits into our role because there is pressure as a yoga teacher that people do look to you for guidance and advice in ways that you know you might not be prepared for. It's surprising sometimes the ways that people seem to look at you as like not only their yoga teacher but their physical therapist and their dietitian and their mental health go to, and all of these different roles that you find yourself playing. And it can be a lot. So I think the path to sanity for a teacher is just to be willing to say, I don't know. It's okay to not know. And, I'm an expert on this, but, this over here, let me direct you over to my friend Jessica,
Mhm.
who is a dietitian, and she can answer your questions.
And beyond saying I don't know is to say, this is not something I'm qualified to comment on. I think even
Hmm.
more importantly than I don't know is to take no responsibility for being able to provide an answer.
Yeah, because it's like saying, it's not that I should know this and I don't. It's just not part of my job. And that's because I've spent my professional time studying the teachings and practices of yoga, and that's what I'm offering you. So I think it actually, helps us to lean into our expertise more rather than saying, like we're lacking something. It's just being respectful of the scope of things and our colleagues as well, and helping people find their way through all these different resources that could be available to them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's really helpful just to think about, and even from the student perspective, that if you're in class and you start to hear the teacher going off into this realm of like food and diet and things, that you have every right to just tune that out and not listen. And if it bothers you or you think it could be harmful to others in the class, you could approach them and give them some feedback about that. And that might be really helpful because, it could be harmful to someone else.
Absolutely. I think that as a yoga teacher, we want the best for our students. And I think we need to take the responsibility to know when to draw the line on sharing our personal opinions and thoughts versus sharing our education as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do focus on yin yoga, this, softer, slower type of practice. And you do offer some classes that are specifically for people who are recovering from eating disorders. So this is like a whole other realm than what we were just talking about, which is like the general yoga class. So I would love to hear some things, that you're sensitive to when you teach people who have a history of disordered eating. And I think this could be useful for all of us because, like, we never know who's in our class. We never, if we're the teacher, we don't always know the history of everyone who's taking our class. Or if we're even like a practitioner, we don't know like who's next to us on the mat and how they might be affected by something we might casually say. So or do alongside of them in practice. So I'm just curious, like, what are some of the things you're sensitive to and that you might keep in the back of your mind, just to be creating a safe space for people who have any kind of history, problematic history with food?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I teach from a trauma informed and trauma sensitive lens. And the wording, I think most importantly, other than that, is that the wording that I choose to use, the language that I choose to use when guiding students, regardless of their background or what brought them to my classes, is that I use language that is descriptive and not qualitative. So, for instance, I'm just going to think of a cue that not that I would use, but um, one of my teachers in my 300 hour will say something to the effect of, place your hands on the fleshy part of your thigh.
Mm, okay.
I would not say that in my class. I would say, if it feels comfortable to you, lay your hand on your leg.
Yeah, because fleshy can be a really loaded word, and especially combined with thigh.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, like, these, we know there are certain parts of the body that people are very critical of.
Mhm.
So like the verbiage is really important, and you could send someone down a whole spiral of thinking about the fleshiness of their thigh, which is distracting from the actual practice that you're trying to offer.
It's not only distracting, it's pure harmful for a
Pure
lot of people. Or I
torture.
hear, scoop the belly. What does scoop the belly mean? Like, so these are not types of words and language that I use. And I said, yes, I use descriptive and not qualitative languaging. I use anatomical
Hmm.
terms. So placing your hands on your abdomen,
Hmm.
never use the word belly, which I think has a
Mm.
lot of, once again, negative connotations for people.
I'll have to think about that when I do tend to say belly. So,
It's
but yeah, I could
yeah.
see for someone else where that might land badly.
Mhm. Like, you come down onto the front side of your body, or allow the
Hmm.
front side of your body to come in contact with the mat, not
Yeah.
lay put your belly down on the mat. So it starts with languaging of that sort and cleaning up, for lack of better words, the languaging. And I think yin affords itself to economy of language, to less talking,
Mhm.
which is which can be helpful, but at the same time, for students who are either experiencing or in recovery from eating disorders or experiencing disordered eating, the quietness and stillness can be very activating, very
Mhm.
anxiety producing, very triggering, and lead to more activation of the body rather than the calming effects that we as teachers want it to have. So, from what I have seen, most yoga, or as far as I've seen, all yoga practices geared towards those in recovery of eating disorders. And there's great, um, evidence to prove that yoga is a healing modality. But most of it is, or from what I can see, all of it is asana based, is definitely has more movement involved. And yes, there is a time and a place for movement, but I also believe there's a time and a place for stillness. So I've
Mhm.
created specific yin yoga practices and classes for this population that involves the stillness, involves the quietude without such long
Mhm.
gaps of quiet. I bring in a theme to each class, a emotional theme such as joy or courage or love or perseverance, and then scatter different poetry and quotes surrounding that theme through the class so that there isn't this long silent space to not only get lost in, but to potentially
Mhm.
have the opposite effect, get activated in. So I bring students into the shape, and then I start with this really calming use of poetry and quotes to fill that space, still
Mhm.
allowing the mind to quiet and settle, but also giving it a place of focus that doesn't let the mind run away in some
Yeah.
far off way, keeps it still in a nurturing and compassionate way.
That makes sense. Julie Johnson and I kind of talked about similar things in the previous episode about trauma informed yin yoga because it is, it can be really challenging to have that space and that silence and that quiet, especially if it's new. Um, so that's good to hear some of the ways that you provide a through line through that quiet space because so much less of the time in a yin practice is about instructing how to get into the pose, right? Which is what you were saying. Like there's a lot less opportunity to kind of make those errors of languaging with the body parts because we're just getting into a shape and we're staying there for like 3 to 5 minutes. So it's not the like constant fluid instructions that like a more active class would be. It's a lot less of that positioning cue and more of like just being in the pose. So we need that like guidance about, well, I'm in the pose now. How do I be in the pose?
Right. And it's not even getting into the full shape or posture. Really careful to guide students to the point where they feel sensation. People that are in recovery from eating disorders or even actively involved with eating disorders lack or lack sensation in their body. They have
Mm,
dulled or numbed altogether sensation in their
mm,
body, and oftentimes are scared to bring the presence of feeling or sensation back in. So this is, exactly why yin is such a relevant modality, because it's so interoceptive and so
mhm,
embodied. Yet you don't need to get into the full, I hate to use the word full expression of the shape, but you don't have to. It can just be subtle movement to
Hmm.
feel the smallest of sensation and then pausing there.
It's like a titrating of sensation.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense though. That is it because if someone has this relationship with eating where they have suppressed some of the physical signals of hunger or fullness or some of that connection has been diminished, that this is an entry point back into feeling the body, because we can't just suppress like some sensations. If we suppress the feeling of anxiety or hunger or whatever, we're kind of like numbing all of it. It's all part of the same package. So
Right.
is that what you were kind of getting at?
Absolutely, absolutely. The so much eating disorders take so much from people beyond their loss of feeling of sensation and beyond the numbing effects that come. So really just learning to reconnect with self in a kind, compassionate um, way is the beginning of the journey. It's not the beginning of the journey. It's really the I would say the goal of the journey out is to reconnect, and reconnect is more than with the nurturance of food. There's the
Hmm.
nurturance of connection within the body,
More globally, like the whole
Mhm.
body.
The whole body.
And yeah, so and you were saying that we don't have to go to like the most intense stretch we can withstand. We probably shouldn't. We should ease in, because if this connection has been lost, it can be a little bit like overwhelming to start feeling everything at once. And so we want to
Mhm.
titrate and make that experience gradual and start to trust that reconnection and trust those signals again.
And also to remember that we are all unique individuals with unique bodies. So, what one feels as extreme feeling, another person may feel complete subtlety, right?
Hmm.
And, um, this is yoga for the sake of feeling. This is not yoga for the sake of exercise. This is, you know, the in my mind the truest form of yoga, that ultimate connection of body, mind, and breath in the present moment. So whether you're just laying in shavasana the entire time, that qualifies as practicing yoga and feeling, being there.
Yeah, and I was thinking that yin might make sense for this particular recovery population, because you can't confuse yin with a fitness activity. It's just so passive and it's so chill, it's so mellow, that I think there'd be less kind of bleed over into like, oh, am I doing this for a workout? And what does this have to do with how I'm going to look and the whole body image thing? Because it's just more of a meditative practice.
It is, and I think that the pandemic has been in general really great for yin yoga in that
Yay, silver lining.
silver lining is that, it's a practice that can be done at home safely, requiring minimal props. You don't even need a yoga mat to practice yin. You don't need any special studio props. They're
Just
always
grab your pillows, grab
grab
your
your
towels.
pillows, grab your towels, your blankets, whatever it may be. But more importantly, you don't even need to look at the screen. I would
Yeah.
say an experienced yin teacher, whether it be yourself or myself or others out there, have such wonderful command of language and descriptive language that the student doesn't need to see the screen, can just take verbal cues to get into a shape and go from there. So when you mention body image, you know, I feel like this is of any type of yoga practice, one that has no possible triggers because you're not seeing somebody else's body. And as a teacher, I don't need to see my student's body because I'm trusting my student and how they feel in their body in the moment, not my looking at the body and saying, ooh, maybe your knee would be better in this direction or that direction. It doesn't matter to me the aesthetics of the practice and of
Mhm.
the shape. It is, what are you, the student, feeling in the body, regardless of the shape?
Mhm. And this is one thing that I think has actually made yoga more accessible. It's like being able to practice on Zoom in our own home. And for someone has a fear of like how their body will be perceived or that they might be criticized, like going into a studio or a gym or whatever just probably won't happen. But, maybe you feel safe to practice at home on your own floor. And especially if the teacher's open to letting you have your camera off and you know that they're not going to be like staring you down and evaluating you, even if they were looking at your image, for helpful reasons to make a suggestion or, something like that, that might be kind of inaccessible for this population that we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't require participants in my class, students in my class, to have the camera on. If they choose to have their camera on, that's great. Oftentimes I'm seeing um, the living room wall or the bedroom floor,
True.
not seeing a body in motion. There's no motion. And so to me, I just think that this is such an appropriate and, as you said, accessible practice for the home practitioner.
Yeah.
More so than most. We don't have to worry about heating a room to a certain temperature. Like, I have a friend that practices Bikram in a walk-in closet that she has a heater in, and she cranks up the heat in this little closet.
Really?
That's her Bikram practice online. I'm thinking, yikes.
That's dedication.
That's dedication, exactly. And for me, I'm like, whatever carpet, whatever room is looking best today, I just go for.
You could do yin in your bed.
You can do, and I actually, I have taught bed yoga before. There is a thing, and when I took the accessible yoga training last winter, and we talked about being able to teach yoga to all bodies, there is bed yoga, and I actually have taught some bed yoga classes, and there's nothing better. I mean, who doesn't want to practice yoga in the bed?
I think it feels fabulous.
Absolutely.
Like, why not? But I will commandeer any piece of my furniture for yoga purposes. So nothing's off limits, including the bed and the stairs and the kitchen counter and the couch and the floor. So it's all a yoga prop to me.
I'd love to see how, when studios continue to reopen, how they're going to adapt to what people have used at home for props, because I doubt we'll be seeing beds and other pieces of furniture in yoga studios. But but I have no intention of going back to teaching in a studio. I love teaching from the comfort of my home online. And I think that another key piece in the accessibility of online yoga is that it's really allowed people to find sanctuary and comfort in their own home.
Hmm.
Find that you don't need to go out to a dedicated yoga studio for an hour here, an hour there, that you can find that comfort, that connection in your own home.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And it's kind of what we were talking about before, that you don't have to have the right outfit and be on the right tropical island and all of that stuff in order to practice. This has just been a great reminder that practice is where we are and it's in the
Right.
present moment.
It is in the present moment. And back when I used to travel a lot, and looking forward to the future when I will resume the pleasure travel that I enjoy so much, I can tell you that I spent plenty of time on airplanes practicing yoga.
Hmm.
Some good chair yoga that you can do on the airplane, right?
Absolutely. And you can absolutely meditate and
Exactly.
send loving kindness to all the passengers. And, there's so many opportunities everywhere for practice if we can kind of open our minds about what practice is, which is part
Expand
of,
beyond asana. Yeah.
that's like part of why I wanted to talk to you, because I think that, we get these images in our mind of what yoga is and what a yogi looks like, and these unrealistic standards that come to us from diet and fitness culture. And if we can break that down, there's so much more opportunity for us all to benefit.
Absolutely. Well said, Addie. Well said.
I wanted to ask you if there's any other like resources, books, whatever, podcasts, people about this topic of yoga and the relationship to food or body image. If there's, if people are listening to this and wanting to learn more, and they could definitely connect with you. But like, how can people learn more about this topic?
Well, definitely connect with me through my website or on social media, though I try not to spend too much time on social media. I'd rather be hanging out in a long yin shape than scrolling through social media. But I want to highlight yoga for eating disorders, and that's where I teach specifically for um, the eating disorder population. And it is a wonderful resource for both professionals working with clients and patients who are experiencing eating disorders or disordered eating, as well as those who are caught up in that cycle of disordered eating and eating disorders. So, yoga for eating disorders
And even
offers.
just like people who are in the unlearning process of
Mhm.
like, oh, I can consider myself healthy at whatever size. I can eat what I want to eat.
They have more resources on the yoga side of things, but I
Hmm.
hope my hope in being and their faculty and being a teacher there is to bring more of that joint expertise that I spoke of earlier, of both the dietetic side and the yoga side, to that services to that
Hmm.
community.
Awesome. And what is your website?
With healthandgratitude.com.
Awesome. And
And you can find me on
everybody,
social media at the same at with
with
health
health
and
and
gratitude.
gratitude. And Jessica has a lot of recipes on her website, everybody. So check that out. She's been giving me little tips on Instagram because I've been posting about the bread I've attempted to bake. I've tried twice so far. It's gone pretty well. I mean, I'm eating it, but you can look on her site for recipes and inspiration for your own celebration of food and nourishment.
Yeah, I my playground, other than my yoga mat, my playground is the kitchen, and I really express my creativity through the recipes I create. I have worked as a recipe developer and a culinary educator, so it's in my scope of practice, right? But it's now just a hobby more than anything, and I just love to create recipes and use my very, very amateur skills to take some photos and get it up online. And occasionally somebody tries those recipes and gives me feedback that they're either really good or, gosh, mine didn't look as good as yours, but it tasted really good. So that's always, a really nice sentiment to receive.
That's what
But
counts.
it is. Food doesn't have to look good to taste good. Remember that.
Yeah.
And and
Well,
similarly to the images of yoga on social media that are highly unrealistic, food on social media is highly unrealistic. And oftentimes, and I can tell you this from my work in recipe development, oftentimes the food that you think you're seeing on social media is not food at all. It's
It
plastic.
it's made by a food stylist for
But it might not
photography.
even be food. It can be
Yeah,
plastic.
right.
It can be clay. So, yeah, and yes, there are lots of hands going on that food. It's not something just put together on a whim, most often.
Man, it looks so good, but it's so unreal.
So unreal, just like that beach yoga, so unreal.
Yeah.
For most, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you for, all the ways in this conversation that you're just encouraging us to all like be our messy selves and enjoy the process and yeah, be in the present moment.
Thank you for having me, Addie. I really enjoyed this conversation and
My
look forward to
pleasure.
continuing it again
I
sometime
learned a
soon.
lot and I hope this will be useful to our listeners. So thanks again, Jessica.
Thank you.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.